In modern American presidential history, two presidents have been influenced by the tragic early death of older brothers. For President Nixon, it was from illness. For President Trump, it was alcoholism. And both men carried this with them for the rest of their lives, and the character that eventually took them into and that they used in the White House. We often don't talk enough about the personal lives of presidents and politicians, but the triumphs and tragedies in their lives and upbringing are often a key to the window of what they do in the White House, and from their point of view are a vital part of their internal world that shapes their decisions and persona. There's an old Chinese saying, the dragon had 9 sons, 龙生九子. And like in nearly all families with multiple brothers, this was the same in the Nixon and Trump families. The older Harold Nixon and Fred Trump, despite brotherly similarities, had marked differences from the younger Richard and Donald. President Nixon grew up in California during the 1920s and early 1930s in a modest Quaker family. However, it wasn't the future president, but his older brother, Harold, who was seen as the bright light of the family, handsome, outgoing, and naturally likable. But in his childhood, Harold was diagnosed with tuberculosis after a chest infection at a time when there was no reliable cure. At age 12, Richard had already lost his younger brother Arthur to the same disease. Their mother, Hannah Nixon, took Harold to sanatoriums in California and Arizona, with the dry climate believed to help those with tuberculosis. The medical expenses put a terrible strain on the family financially, and young Richard Nixon was without his mother during a lot of this time. To help the family, he had to work in the family grocery store in addition to his studies, working long days, but developing the intense discipline that would later define him politically. But the emotional impact was probably even greater. Nixon, like many younger brothers, looked up to his older brother, the sibling with the natural charm, good looks and charisma that didn't come naturally to Nixon. In 1933, Harold succumbed to tuberculosis at 23, leaving a permanent mark on his younger brother. After Harold's death, the brother who had been the hope of the family, the burden and expectation fell onto Richard. To Richard Nixon, success was now an obligation to achieve the potential that his brother could have reached, a dogged determinism that would come back from a presidential defeat and a governorship defeat and a presidential resignation. Half a century later, the future President Trump was the younger brother in the shadow of his older brother, Fred Trump Jr. Freddie, as the older brother who carried his father's first name, was the one expected to follow his father into the family business of New York real estate and construction, as opposed to Donald. But like Harold and Richard Nixon, Fred Jr. and Donald were different sons. Fred Jr., sociable and easygoing, described as having, quote, the best personality in the family, didn't fit naturally into the hard, aggressive, confrontational world of New York real estate, unlike his younger brother Donald. Snubbing real estate, Fred Jr. instead became an airline pilot, but over time, never feeling like he fitted in and struggling to find somewhere he was happy, Fred began turning to alcohol. He flew commercially for a year or so after graduating, but after this brief time returned to the family business, with accounts differing as to why. Some former pilots he worked with said that they believed it was due to his alcoholism, whereas Donald has said that he and their father wanted Freddie to return to the family business. Freddie tried his own venture before returning to the family business, but it didn't work out. His drinking worsened over the years and his life gradually unraveled. In the 1970s, Fred had to have parts of his stomach removed as a result of his alcoholism, and in 1981 he died at 42 from a heart attack caused by his addiction. He begged his younger brother to promise to never touch alcohol. Donald, as such, has been a teetotaler his whole life and never smoked cigarettes either. After Fred's death, regret, shame, and a sense of loss fell upon his surviving family. Donald became the oldest surviving son, becoming more resolved against substances, developing, as he has hinted towards in interviews, a remorse about not encouraging his older brother's preference for piloting and disinterest in the business world. And the reminder that he has had years and decades ahead of him, that his brother would never get to make his dent in the universe, probably increased his ambitiousness, leading to his expansion of the family business from apartment complexes to a larger real estate, hospitality, media and branding empire. The first non-politician to secure one of the two major parties' presidential nominations, and only the second non-consecutive presidential term, alongside Grover Cleveland. Both future presidents, contrary to what one might assume about a president, grew up in the shadow of an older brother who had carried most of the family's expectations, and who would have been the one chosen if you had told the family early on that one day one of their children would have been president. Both the younger brothers occupied the Oval Office instead, but their older brothers occupied it as well in spirit, as a presence in the president's minds, cornerstones of their mindset, philosophy and drive. Although we don't usually look at a president's personal life when looking at their presidency, for them, as the person who lives it, they are inseparable, like the brotherly bond, whatever happens to the brothers themselves over the years.